welcome to the Life Unscripted podcast, episode 3, where we dive deep into the untold stories and pressing issues shaping our world. I'm your host, Brian, and today we're crafting a narrative that threads together history, nature, and modern realities. First up, we'll uncover the shadowy depths of McCarthyism, an era that tested the fabric of freedom in America. What led to the paranoia? And does it resonate with today's political climate? Next, we'll explore the beauty and intrigue of the small Japanese star sand. You won't believe what it represents and how it connects us to the delicate balance of nature. And finally, we'll confront a sobering reality: American poverty. What are the roots of this issue, and how can understanding it empower change? Join us every week as we pull back the curtain on the stories that define us, inspire us, and sometimes even challenge us. This is the Life Unscripted podcast, where every conversation is a chance to rewrite the narrative. Let's dive in. So on segment 1, the poverty puzzle of America, I wanted to do something that shows the current America as we see it as of, a couple of months ago. It's poverty. Who doesn't want to talk about that, right? Everyone is dealing with it at one point or another. I think it's very important that we understand that the state of poverty in the United States is in 2022 was 37.9 million Americans lived in poverty, which means nearly 12% of the population was struggling to make ends meet. While many of us had a vague idea about poverty, do we really know what's hitting the hardest? If we zoom into the southern U.S., where many of the highest poverty rates live, states like Mississippi, Louisiana, and New Mexico are the top 5, and it's not just an issue of numbers, it's an issue of history. These states are often rural with low levels of education and limited access to high-paying jobs, and get this, about 1 in 5 counties in the South have been in persistent poverty for decades, meaning that 30 years or more the poverty rate has stayed above 20%. It's no surprise, right? We hear the stats, but we often forget the people behind these numbers. The real issue isn't just the poverty rate, it's the lack of opportunity, the ripple effect of generations not getting education or resources to break out of that cycle. The kicker to this is it's all of everybody's problem here. We all have a stake in improving our education and in creating jobs and making sure people have access to the tools they need to succeed. Whether you're in the north, south, east, or west, we can't ignore what's happening to these communities. The changes we need are possible, but it's going to take effort, and we can start by spreading awareness and pushing meaningful reform. I'm going through a little bit of a list here, just showing exactly the different types of poverty rates that are going on within these types of cities, states. It's kind of shocking to think about, You'd think we would have had this under control, but it seems to me that people are making a lot more money off of it than we realize. I guess poverty makes money to some people, and that's the unfortunate thing. But the good lifeline here is poverty tends to go up and down, just like inflation of countries, so regardless of a decade or two, in the forerunner here, 2030, 2040, it's probably going to go down considerably, but nothing's perfect. As these types of articles come into play here, I'll be able to dissect it a little bit more. We'll see what happens with this Trump administration the first year on his job after he gets back into the White House, so we'll check that out later. Segment 2. Star sand and the wonders of the foraminifera. So next up, we're going to switch gears. You might not think tiny creatures have anything to do with poverty or politics, but bear with me because this one's a bit wild. These things are cool, by the way. I mean, look at that thing. Look at all of these freaking awesome little creatures that have lived well more than any human has. The tiniest of stars beneath our feet can reveal the greatest mysteries of deep time for the second edition of the Mini Museum. Foraminifera are single-celled creatures which produce a diverse range of beautiful and tiny protective shells. These shells appear in the fossil record as far back as 550 million years, and in some locations entire beaches are made up of these so-called forum sands. Tiny, intricate, and often star-shaped, and get this, these little critters have been around for millions of years. Some of the most beautiful shells are found in Okinawa, Japan, on beaches made almost entirely of these tiny shells. I'm going to leave these articles up on my YouTube so you can click on them, so I'm just going to briefly be going through this whole entire article for you guys. They're called star sand, and there's a legend about these guys, the islands about these star-shaped shells, being the children of the polar star, and the Southern Cross devoured by a giant sea serpent, and then spatted out onto the beach. Now you're probably wondering, okay, cool, but what's the big deal with these little guys? Well, these tiny creatures are so much more than just a beautiful shell. I mean, the foraminifera have been used by scientists for years to study the climate change and the health of coral reefs. Their fossils help us track ancient sea temperatures and understand how Earth's climate has shifted over the time being. Their impact is a lot more massive than we kind of think about. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest things in our life, like whether they're organisms or ideas, they hold the key to understanding the much bigger concepts here. Much like those tiny forums, we too can have a profound impact, even if we seem small or insignificant. I mean, how many raindrops does it take for an inch of rain to hit your county or city? It's the little things in this world that make such a big difference. I'm always going to stay by that, and a lot of people should have the positivity to understanding that today. So for this last segment, we're going to go a little bit political here. It's the McCarthy era in the 90s. So it's about the press and what he had done to kind of manipulate the news in the way that we understand free speech as it is today. The Nyman reports. These are usually really good articles. They try to keep them unedited. So this is something you guys should be thinking about now as we go into this information era. A lot of people are going to be changing and redacting statements and things of that nature, when in reality, that's not fair to the world and to history. That's why historians are so important to our times. Let's see how it handles controversial stories though, right? You know how in controversial stories are. You know how in today's world every bit of news seems to come with a headline designed to grab your attention, sometimes even before we know the full freaking story? Well, the press has always had that issue, but it was particularly evident with the rise of Senator Joseph McCarthy in those 1950s. McCarthy, the guy who led the infamous Red Scare, witch hunts accusing people of being communists without evidence, the press, instead of critically investigating them, he often amplified those accusations, feeding into the chaos. The twist with this all is that the cycle of scandal, the accusations, the counter-accusation wasn't just about McCarthy. It was about how headlines get created and how the press can either inform or inflame. It kind of reminds you of today's politics. It's head after head. They don't care how people think. They just want to know that there's these smear campaigns going out here, and people are taking sides way more than they need to be, and it's dividing our country way more than we think it is. But I want you to imagine a world where a single statement can be broadcast from Washington to the farthest reaches of the country in just minutes. I mean, that's what media is. But remember, this is the 50s. They had to do this a lot differently. That was the reality with McCarthy's accusations, though. I mean, the press had to grapple with the responsibility whether to give his every word a headline, or if they should stand back and question whether that story was even worth telling to begin with. So how does this apply today? I mean, we're still living in an age where sensational headlines drive clicks, but at what cost? It's on the media to be responsible in what it amplifies. That freedom of speech is very important, and I feel like we're using it the wrong way, as a weapon against each other. These headlines get attention, but sometimes it's the quiet stories like those about poverty or the tiny creatures beneath our feet that deserve just as much of the spotlight. That is all we have for today, so there you have it. 3 completely different stories, but they all tie back to the one major point. Whether we're talking about poverty, the mysteries of the ocean, or the way that we consume our news, that's the little things that are always going to matter. Sometimes the tiny, often overlooked details that have the most profound impact. It's easy to get caught up in the noise, whether it's in the media or in society at large. But as we've seen today, changes start from the ground up. From just understanding the complexity of poverty in the South to appreciating the smallest creatures that shape our world. So what can you do today to notice the tiny things that matter? Thank you for tuning into the Life Unscripted podcast, episode 3. Please keep exploring, keep on questioning, keep making an impact, and no matter how small. Until next time, stay curious. As always, I will leave you with the quote: "You have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world." Harriet Tubman.